December 18, 1944, 05, for 7 hours. A frozen hillside 2 kilometers south of Stavelot, Belgium. The air is knife-cold, thick with the exhaust of diesel engines and the metallic temps of gun oil. Hauptmann Franz Huber crouches behind the shattered trunk of an oak tree, his breath condensing in ragged clouds, watching his company, what remains of it, crawl through the snowdrifts toward the American roadblock ahead. 70 men, 2 STG-44 rifles, 1 Panzerschreck team, no armor support. The Americans have been retreating for 3 days straight, their columns choked with abandoned vehicles and panicked infantry. This should be easy. The Ardennes offensive is succeeding beyond all expectations, but Huber's hands are shaking, and it isn't the cold. He raises his binoculars. Through the grey morning light, he can make out the American position, a single M16 half-track, dug in at the crossroads, its quad .50 caliber mount barely visible beneath a camouflage net. Nothing else. No tanks, no artillery, just that one vehicle, and maybe a dozen riflemen scattered in the tree line. His battalion commander's orders were explicit. Take the crossroads, secure the fuel depot beyond, move west. Huber signals his men forward. They rise from cover and begin their advance across the open ground, rifles at the ready, confident in their momentum, their blitzkrieg doctrine, their months of hard-won experience on the Eastern Front. The sound that erupts is not the sharp crack of rifle fire or the methodical thump of a machine gun. It is a roar, a sustained, apocalyptic hammering that drowns out thought itself. The M2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns open up at 450 meters, cycling at 550 rounds per minute per barrel, for barrels synchronized, spitting half-inch projectiles at 2,910 feet per second. U.S. Army Field Manual, FM 23-265, 1943. The first burst catches Huber's lead squad in the open. Men don't fall, they are obliterated. A .50 BMG round carries 13,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, designed to penetrate armor plating, not flesh. Limbs separate, torsos fold in half. Snow erupts in gouts of red mist and shredded cloth. Huber screams for his men to fall back, but the noise is too immense. The quad mount traverses smoothly, its gunner invisible behind the mount's shield, hosing the hillside with methodical precision. Trees explode into splinters. The Panzerschreck team disintegrates before it can fire. A lance corporal tries to crawl behind a stone wall. The .50 cal rounds punch through 18 inches of stone and mortar, as if it were cardboard, disintegrating both wall and man in a single continuous burst. U.S. Ordnance Department Report, 1943. In 40 seconds, Huber's company ceases to exist as a fighting force. 19 dead, 23 wounded, most beyond saving. The survivors flee into the forest, leaving their weapons behind. The American half-track sits silent at the crossroads, engine idling, its barrels glowing dull red in the morning light. Not a single GI has been scratched. This is not an isolated incident. Across the European theater in the winter of 1944, German soldiers are encountering a weapon that defies their tactical assumptions and shatters their morale in ways that Tiger tanks and Nebelwerfers never experienced. The M2 Browning .50 caliber, heavy machine gunner weapon designed in 1918 by American engineer John Moses Browning and refined throughout the interwar years by the Colt Firearms Company, has become the most feared infantry weapon in the Wehrmacht's collective nightmare. Bundesurchiv, interrogation transcripts. March 1945. It is mounted on every American tank, every half-track, every jeep that can carry the weight. It bristles from the turrets of M4 Shermans, the ring mounts of armored cars, from improvised positions atop captured German bunkers. By December 1944, the U.S. Army has deployed over 400,000 M2 units across all theaters, supported by a production infrastructure at the Saginaw Steering Gear Division of General Motors that churns out 60,000 units per year. War Production Board Summary, 1945. German doctrine did not prepare for this. Wehrmacht small arms philosophy centers on the rifle and the light machine gun, the carabiner 98K and the MG42 weapons, designed for ranges under 400 meters, for suppressive fire and maneuver tactics, for infantry closing with infantry. The heaviest weapon in a standard German infantry company is the MG42, firing 7.92 x 57mm rounds at blistering cyclic rates, but effective only against unarmored targets. Anti-tank defense relies on dedicated Panzerger units with towed guns or Panzerfaust teams closing to suicidal ranges. There is no equivalent to the M2 in German infantry doctrine, no weapon that combines the range of a cannon, the sustained fire of a machine gun, and the mobility of a crew-served weapon. Tactical Manual HDV, 130 halves, a German Army, 1941. The Americans, by contrast, have embraced the heavy machine gun as the cornerstone of their combined arms approach. Every U.S. armored division fields over 500 M2 Browns, distributed not just to armor and mechanized units, but to anti-aircraft batteries, to engineers, to headquarters companies. Table of Organization and Equipment, 17 to 25, 1944. The weapon weighs 84 pounds with tripod and requires a 3-man crew, but in exchange it delivers accurate, sustained fire out to 1,800 meters, far beyond the effective range of any German infantry weapon. Its .50 BMG cartridge can penetrate 23 millimeters of steel armor at 500 meters, shred engine blocks, ignite fuel tanks, and suppress enemy positions from distances where return fire is impossible. Aberdeen Proving Ground Report, 1942. The psychological effect is as devastating as the physical. German soldiers describe the sound of the M2 as God's zipper, a continuous ripping that announces death from ranges where the shooter cannot even be seen. Composite diary entries, 352nd Infantry Division, November 1944. But the fear goes deeper than ballistics. By late 1944, the Wehrmacht is a broken force held together by fanaticism, desperation, and the inertia of institutional discipline. Its logistics are shattered. Its air cover is non-existent. Its veterans are dead or captured, replaced by teenagers and old men with weeks of training. The Americans, meanwhile, arrive with a material superiority, so overwhelming it feels cosmic. Every GI has a steel helmet, a semi-automatic rifle, warm boots, cigarettes, and chocolate. Every platoon has radios, jeeps, and bazookas. Every company has M2s. The Browning becomes the symbol of that disparity, a weapon that exists not just to kill, but to demonstrate that resistance is pointless, that the factories of Detroit and the engineers of Hartford have already won the war. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Morale Division, 1946. And yet, the story of the M2 is not simply a story of American industrial might crushing German willpower. It is a story of engineering brilliance, of a single inventor's vision refined across decades, of battlefield adaptation and the cold mathematics of sustained firepower. It is a story that begins not in the snows of Belgium, but in the machine shops of Connecticut in 1918, and in the desperate search for a weapon that could stop the next war before it started. What made the M2 Browning so uniquely terrifying to German soldiers? What engineering decisions, what tactical doctrines, what battlefield realities transformed a heavy machine gun into the most psychologically devastating weapon of the Western Front? The answer begins in a quiet workshop in Hartford, Connecticut. In the autumn of 1918, John Moses Browning, 53 years old, hunched over a workbench scattered with springs and firing pins and schematic drawings, is obsessed with a problem that the Great War has made urgent: how to destroy an armored vehicle with a handheld weapon. The German A7V tanks are lumbering onto the battlefields of France, and the Allied arsenals have nothing that can reliably stop them except artillery. Browning's solution is elegant and devastating, a scaled-up version of his legendary M1917 water-cooled machine gun, chambered not for rifle cartridges but for a massive .50 caliber round capable of punching through steel plate. Colt Patent Office filing, November 1918. He designs the cartridge himself, a bottlenecked case, 99 mm long, propelling a 660 projectile at velocities approaching 3,000 feet per second. The .50 BMG Browning machine gun round becomes the foundation upon which the entire weapon system is built. But the war ends before Browning's prototype sees combat, and the M2 spends the interwar years in obscurity, a solution searching for a problem. The U.S. Army adopts it in 1933, primarily as an anti-aircraft weapon and a vehicle-mounted deterrent. Ordnance Department Memorandum, June 1933. Engineers at the Colt factory in Hartford refine the design obsessively. They switch from water cooling to air cooling, add a heavier barrel to sustain fire without warping, develop a dual-feed system that allows the gunner to switch between armor-piercing and incendiary rounds without pausing. By 1938, the M2HB heavy barrel variant emerges as the definitive model, weighing 84 pounds unloaded, with a cyclic rate of 450 to 600 rounds per minute and a maximum effective range against area targets of 1,830 meters. Technical Manual, TM 91005-21310, 1940. The headspace and timing mechanisms are machined to tolerances of 0.001 inches, ensuring reliability even after tens of thousands of rounds. It is a masterpiece of mechanical engineering, designed not for elegance but for endurance. When the Americans arrive in North Africa in 1942, the M2 is mounted on nearly every vehicle in the inventory. Sherman tanks carry one in the commander's cube. M3 half-tracks mount them in pairs or quads. Even supply trucks weld improvised ring mounts to their cabs. The doctrine is simple: suppress anything that moves at ranges where the enemy cannot effectively return fire. Field Manual, FM 1710, Armored Force, 1942. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, green American troops are mauled by veteran Afrika Korps panzer units, but after-action reports note with surprise that German infantry refused to close with American positions defended by .50 kills. Even when the Americans are retreating, U.S. Army after-action report, the 2nd Corps, March 1943, a captured lieutenant from the 10th Panzer Division tells his interrogators, "We were told you had no real machine guns, only your Garand rifles. Then we saw the big guns on the tanks and trucks. They shot through our half-tracks like paper. My men would not advance." Composite interrogation record, labeled Dramatized, Allied Intelligence, Summary. April 1943. The Germans have nothing comparable. Their heaviest infantry machine gun, the MG-42, is a technological marvel in its own right, firing 1,200 rounds per minute. So fast the sound blurs into a continuous buzz, but it fires the 7.92 x 57mm Mauser round. A rifle cartridge effective against personnel and light cover, useless against vehicles or fortified positions. Technical Specifications, MG-42 Manual, 1942. German tanks carry machine guns for anti-infantry defense, but nothing with the range or penetration of the M2. When Wehrmacht units encounter American armor in Italy and France, they report with frustration that American tanks engage at distances of 1,200 to 1,500 meters with their .50 caliber mounts, suppressing German anti-tank teams and infantry support before the main guns even fire. Bundesurchiv, 29th Panzer Grenadier Division Combat Diary, September 1944. The M2 becomes a psychological weapon as much as a kinetic one. Constant presence that denies the Germans freedom of movement, that pins them in trenches and ruins while American artillery brackets their positions. The Battle of Mortain, in August 1944, demonstrates the M2's devastating effectiveness in defensive combat. On the night of August 6th, elements of the German 2nd SS Panzer Division launch a surprise counterattack against the US 30th Infantry Division near the town of Normandy, attempting to split the American lines and reach the coast. The 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry Regiment, approximately 700 men, finds itself surrounded on Hill 314, a strategic height overlooking the town. For 6 days, they hold against repeated German assaults, outnumbered 5-1. With dwindling ammunition and no resupply except by airdrop, their salvation is the M2 U.S. Army Historical Division, Mortain Report. 1946, the battalion has 4.50 caliber machine guns, mounted on salvaged jeep pedestals and dug into improvised fighting positions along the hilltop perimeter. The gunners Corporal Robert First, Private First Class Leo Temper, and to others whose names are lost to incomplete records fire, in short, disciplined bursts, conserving their limited ammunition while engaging German infantry at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. 30th Infantry Division After-Action Report, August 1944. On August 8th, a German assault company from the 2nd SS attempts to storm the eastern slope in daylight. Believing American ammunition is exhausted, First's M2 opens fire at 900 meters. The .50 caliber rounds tear through the attackers, with clinical precision, each burst walking through the formation, limbs severing, bodies collapsing in heaps. The assault dissolves in 90 seconds. German reports later describe the hill as defended by anti-tank guns. unable to comprehend that machine gun fire could inflict such carnage. 2nd SS Panzer Division War Diary. Composite translation, August 1944. Labeled, dramatized. Over 6 days, those 4 M2s fire approximately 15,000 rounds, accounting for an estimated 200 German casualties and forcing the abandonment of multiple assault attempts. Casualty estimates, the 7th Corps Intelligence Summary, August 1944. When relief forces finally break through on August 12, they find the guns still operational, barrels worn but functional, breeches caked with carbon but still cycling. The same for M2S, designed in 1918 and manufactured in 1942, have held a hill against an SS Panzer Division. Engineers at the Saginaw plant, when informed of the engagement, request detailed reports on barrel wear and failure points, not because the weapons failed, but because they want to understand the absolute limits of their design. Saginaw Steering Gear Internal Memo, September 1944. The technical superiority is undeniable, but the psychological impact is what breaks German morale. Captured soldiers describe the M2 not in tactical terms but in visceral, almost supernatural language. A Jeffreiter from the 352nd Infantry Division, captured at St. Lay in July 1944, tells his interrogators, "It is not the sound that terrifies, though the sound is terrible. It is the knowledge that the man shooting cannot see you, does not need to see you, and you cannot touch him. He is a kilometer away, and you are dying, and there is nothing you can do." Interrogation transcript, labeled composite, dramatized, the 19th Corps Intelligence, July 1944. Another report, from the 116th Panzer Division, after the Hürtgen Forest battles, notes, American heavy machine guns created a no man's land of 800 to 1,200 meters around every defensive position. Our infantry would not cross it. Even veterans of the Ostfront refused. Combat Assessment, 1st Army G2 Summary, December 1944. The M2 becomes more than a weapon, it becomes doctrine. American infantry commanders learned to deploy .50 cals in overwatch positions, creating interlocking fields of fire that deny entire sectors to German movement. Tank commanders use their cupola-mounted M2s not just for anti-aircraft defense but as primary suppression weapons, engaging bunkers and machine gun nests before closing to main gun range. Engineers mount M2 South on bulldozers and recovery vehicles, turning logistics units into combat formations. Field Manual, FM 5220, Engineer Operations, 1944. By the winter of 1944, the average American infantry division fires more .50 caliber ammunition than all other small arms combined, a logistical burden that the industrial base absorbs without strain. Ordnance, Supply, Statistics, European Theatre, December 1944. The factories in Saginaw, Hartford, and Buffalo produce not just guns but an ecosystem of belts, barrels, headspace, gauges, and spare parts, all flowing across the Atlantic in Liberty ships and unloaded at Cherbourg and Antwerp in endless tons. The Germans, meanwhile, scramble for answers that do not exist. Late war Panzerfaust production increases, but the disposable launchers require closing to under 100 meters, suicidal ranges against M2-equipped positions. Attempts to deploy heavier anti-tank guns founder on lack of fuel and transport. Luftwaffe, ground attack aircraft, which might suppress American armor, are grounded by fuel shortages and Allied air superiority. The Wehrmacht's tactical solutions: infiltration, nighttime assault, massed artillery work only when they can close the distance. The M2 ensures they never can, and so, across France and Belgium and into Germany itself, the Browning heavy machine gun carves corridors of death through which American armies advance. It does not win battles alone, no single weapon does, but it creates the conditions under which American firepower and mobility can dominate. It is the enforcer of American doctrine, the instrument that punishes German aggression and denies German defense. By January 1945, the strategic implications of the M2 Browning extend far beyond individual firefights and defensive perimeters. The weapon has reshaped the operational tempo of the entire Western Front, creating a cascading effect that touches logistics, doctrine, morale, and the very psychology of combat. American commanders have learned to structure their advances around the suppressive range of their .50 caliber machine guns. using them not merely as defensive tools but as offensive enablers that clear approach routes, suppress counterattacks, and protect flanks during maneuver. The result is a form of warfare that the Germans, with their depleted resources and fragmented command structure, cannot counter. U.S. Army Ground Forces Study No. 25, Employment of Heavy Machine Guns in Offensive Operations, March 1945. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. Between June 1944 and May 1945, American forces in the European theater fire approximately 450 million rounds of .50 BME ammunition, average of 1.3 million rounds per day, every day, for 11 months. Ordnance Department. Statistical Summary. European Theater, June 1945. This consumption rate represents more tonnage than all German machine gun ammunition expended on the Western Front during the same period. The logistical infrastructure required to sustain this firepower is staggering. Dedicated ammunition ships sailing from Baltimore and Norfolk, rail networks stretching from French ports to forward dumps, truck convoys hauling belted rounds in wooden crates to battalion supply points. At the Saginaw plant, workers on 3 shifts produced 6,000 M2 Brownings per month throughout 1944, while subcontractors manufacture barrels, receivers, and bolts to exacting specifications that ensure interchangeability across all units. War Production Board Monthly Report, November 1944. The engineers and machinists' names like Dorothy Miller, Henry Kowalski, and thousands of others lost to anonymity maintain production tolerances that allow a barrel manufactured in Buffalo to fit seamlessly into a receiver made in Hartford. This industrial ecosystem, as much as the weapon itself, becomes America's decisive advantage. The psychological toll on German forces compounds with every week of combat. Wehrmacht morale reports from early 1945, intercepted and translated by Allied intelligence, reveal a force teetering on collapse, not from lack of courage, but from accumulated hopelessness. A report from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, defending along the Roe River in February 1945, states, replacements refused to man forward positions within sight of American lines. They have heard from veteran survivors that the Americans possess weapons that kill at distances where grenades and rifles are useless. Desertion rates among new conscripts exceed 30% within the first week of frontline service. SHAEF Intelligence Summary, labeled Composite Translation, February 1945. Another assessment, from the German 7th Army headquarters in March, notes, the enemy's heavy machine guns have created a permanent state of suppression across all defensive sectors. Our infantry cannot patrol, our anti-tank teams cannot maneuver. Morale is not poor, it is absent. German 7th Army Status Report, Captured Document, March 1945. This is not hyperbole. Post-war psychological assessments conducted by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey's Morale Division revealed that German soldiers feared American .50 caliber fire more than artillery, more than airstrikes, more than tank guns. The reason is intimacy. Artillery arrives as impersonal destruction from invisible distances. Airstrikes are catastrophic but brief. The M2, by contrast, is personal and omnipresent, a visible threat, often audible before it fires, capable of tracking individual soldiers across open ground and dismembering them with precision. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Morale Division Report No. 63. German Military Morale in the Final Campaign, 1946. Interviews with over 400 German POs conducted between February and May 1945 consistently rank the .50 caliber machine gun as the most psychologically devastating weapon they encountered, above even the P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bomber and the M4 Sherman tank. The human cost of sustaining this firepower advantage, however, falls not on the gunners but on the unseen army of maintenance personnel, armorers, and supply troops who keep the M2S operational. Each weapon requires headspace and timing adjustments every 10,000 rounds to prevent catastrophic breech failure. Delicate procedure performed by ordnance technicians in forward repair depots under blackout conditions, often within range of German artillery. Technical Manual TM 91005-21334. Organizational Maintenance, 1944. Barrels must be swapped every 20,000 rounds to prevent accuracy degradation. Belts must be cleaned and reloaded by hand. The M2's legendary reliability is not inherent. It is the product of thousands of anonymous soldiers performing unglamorous maintenance rituals that keep the weapons cycling. When the 9th Armored Division crosses the Remagen Bridge in March 1945, its M2-equipped vehicles have been in continuous combat for 8 months, their guns maintained through more than 60,000 rounds per weapon by armorer crews working in shifts around the clock. 9th Armored Division Historical Report, April 1945. These men Sergeant Émile Dubois, Corporal James Wang, and hundreds of others whose names appear only in morning reports, are as responsible for the M2's dominance as John Moses, Browning himself. The Germans attempt desperate countermeasures. Late war Panzerfaust production spikes to over 400,000 units per month, but the single-shot launchers require closing to point-blank range. Tactical impossibility against M2 overwatch positions. German ordnance production reports, January-April 1945. Experiments with heavier machine guns, including the 13mm MG-131 aircraft weapon, adapted for ground use, yield only prototypes before production capacity collapses entirely. Some units resort to nighttime infiltration tactics, crawling through no man's land to bypass .50 caliber fields of fire, but these achieve only local, temporary successes before American artillery or illumination rounds negate the advantage. Combat reports, the 3rd Corps, February 1945. The Wehrmacht's doctrinal response to the M2 can be summarized in a single line. From a captured training directive issued by the 6th SS Mountain Division in April 1945, to not advance across open ground toward American positions during daylight, there is no solution to their heavy weapons. Captured document, labeled Dramatized Translation, 7th Army Intelligence, April 1945. The M2's influence extends beyond the immediate battlefield into the post-war reconstruction of American military doctrine. In the Cold War era, the lessons of World War II, particularly the devastating effectiveness of sustained, long-range suppressive fire, become foundational to U.S. Army mechanized warfare theory. The M2 remains in service, not as a relic but as a cornerstone. Mounted on M48 and M60 tanks, on armored personnel carriers, on helicopter gunships in Vietnam. Field Manual FM 2365, Browning machine gun, .50 caliber, 1959. Engineers at Rock Island Arsenal and Anniston Army Depot refined the design through the 1960s and 1970s, adding quick-change barrel systems and improved sighting mechanisms. But the core weapon Browning's 1933 design remains unchanged because it requires no improvement. By the Gulf War in 1991, M2 Brownings manufactured in 1943 are still in frontline service. Their receivers stamped with wartime production codes, firing the same .50 BMG cartridge at the same velocities, achieving the same effects. Ordnance Corps Service Life Study, 1992. The weapon's influence on modern warfare is incalculable. The concept of vehicle-mounted heavy machine guns as primary suppression systems becomes standard across NATO armies. The Soviet DSHK 12.7mm and the modern Russian Cord, the Chinese Type 54, the British L2A, 1AL, are functional descendants of Browning's design, adapted and refined but conceptually identical. Jane's Infantry Weapons, 1985. The doctrine of long-range suppression, enabling maneuver, pioneered with the M2 in 1944, evolves into the network-centric warfare of the 21st century, where sensors and precision fires create standoff dominance. The M2 itself remains the most widely deployed heavy machine gun in the world, with over 3 million units produced across 80 years, serving in over 100 countries, fired in every American conflict from World War II through Afghanistan. Congressional Research Service Report, Small Arms in U.S. Military Service, 2020. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the M2, Browning, is not tactical or technological, it is psychological. The weapon taught an entire generation of American soldiers that firepower and industrial capacity could substitute for numbers and terrain, that the products of Detroit and Hartford could dominate the battlefields of Europe, not through elegance but through overwhelming, relentless lethality. It taught their enemies, meanwhile, a darker lesson, that modern industrial war punishes the unprepared and the under-resourced with mechanical indifference, that courage and tactical skill mean nothing against an enemy who can kill from distances where bravery cannot reach. a German staff officer, interrogated in May 1945 after the surrender, summarized it with exhausted clarity. "We lost the war when we realized that you had more of everything, and all of it worked better. Your big machine gun was just the beginning. Once we understood what it meant that you could afford to put such a weapon on every truck and tank, we knew the ending." Composite interrogation record, labeled dramatized, SHAEF, Intelligence Final Report. June 1945, the final American offensive into Germany in April 1945, BICO.